Good evening. As I hope you know by now, I'm Jim Ludis. I'm the Executive Director of the Pell Center. It's my pleasure to welcome you here tonight. So tonight's speakers are two gentlemen that I've known for a while. They're doing, I think, some of the most important work on national strategy that's been done in 60 years. We had dinner just before the lecture tonight, and I'm fired up and I'm ready to go, but this is their gig. And so let me just say quickly, we've got tonight Patrick Doherty, who's Deputy Director of the National Security Studies Program and Director of the Smart Strategy Initiative at the New America Foundation. And joining him is Puck Mickleby, that's his call sign. He's a retired Marine aviator who is also now a fellow, senior fellow?
Senior fellow.
Senior fellow? Senior fellow at the New America Foundation. Without further ado, I'm not sure who's going first. Their bios are in the program, and please give a warm welcome to Puck Mickleby.
Hey. Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it. Thanks, Jim, for having us at Pell Center. I mean, I really appreciate it. I love being back here in Newport. I got to tell you, it won't be a long story, it'll be a short story. The last time I was really here was in the summer of 1985. I worked at William and Manchester Boatyard for a summer, scraping hulls. I wasn't even doing anything important, but they were working on, I think, America 2 at the time. And that, talk about security. They had a lot of security then, so I couldn't get in there. But sure loved my summer there. It was a time away from Naval Academy, and I think Harry's Bar was up and running at the time, so it was all good. So I had a good time. So it's great to be here. Well, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about grand strategy, our idea around grand strategy. And I'm just going to set a little bit of the context about how Patrick and I even got together. I mean, how this, at least from my perspective, how we got to this point. But we'd like to also describe exactly what we're talking about. That grand strategy is a real thing. That it's just not fluff. It's not the lore of history books. That we not only can do it, have the capacity to do it, we don't have any other choice but to do it, given the condition in our country, not only in our country, but around the world. We are truly in historic times, and we have to think at historic scales, not only in a geopolitical sense, but in a human sense. And before, I just got to do my disclaimer right up front. Yes, I'm a retired Marine. I still think like a Marine, and therefore I'm blissfully apolitical, so you're not going to hear any political diatribe coming out of me from one side of the aisle or the other, because I don't believe in it, quite frankly. The other thing I'm going to tell you is that don't come from it from any other perspective than a Marine's perspective. So you can call it idealistic pragmatism or pragmatic idealism, I don't care, but it's going to be kind of relatively bare-knuckled. And as my wife told me, please don't drop an F-bomb in public, and I'll try my best not to. All right, so bear with me if something slips out, but I tend to get amped up talking about this because I care that much. So, but I'll behave myself, I promise. All right, so how did this start? Just from my perspective, I want to just kind of set the context for how Patrick and I came together on talking about grand strategy. For me, it started as leading strategy for Special Operations Command. And at the time, and this was in the 2007. And at the time, the commander of Special Ops was Admiral Eric Olson, fellow Minnesotan. Go Twins. And he gave us initial guidance for how to frame out the very first ever strategy for Special Operations. Believe it or not, in the 20th year of Special Operations Command, they had yet to have a strategy. So we were supposed to stand up a strategy division, create this strategy. But a very important thing that he said, figure out how to get out in front of the sound of the guns. Let that sink in for a second, because it's an important thing to say from a 4-star Navy SEAL. Figure out how to get out in front of the sound of the guns. Clearly recognizing that at least in 2007, that we probably weren't on the right trend line, at least from a military perspective, the issues of capacity, our ability to engage the world in the present form frameworks that we currently had. So that focused us in a certain degree. And we really took a different approach on how to take on strategy. We looked at it from a very systemic perspective. We were looking at global trends and how could you shape out the environment to prevent conflict. That got us into some kooky stuff of looking at urban design, things like regenerative agriculture, female health and education issues, things like that we could get out in front to really try to influence the security environment, because we just couldn't be in all places at all times and take care of business, because there's only so much capacity in headbutting, quite frankly. And eventually your head starts to hurt. And our heads were starting to hurt a little bit. So that's the approach that we took. Well, lo and behold, in about October of 2008, after developing a different framework of how to go about doing a special ops strategy, Admiral Mullen came down to Special Operations Command headquarters and kind of got a dog and pony show about what we were doing. And lo and behold, shortly thereafter, I get a call from a guy named Navy Captain Wayne Porter, who had a long time been on Admiral Mullen's staff, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And Wayne had about 7 years been on with Admiral Mullen. And so Wayne called me. He said, hey, Admiral Mullen told me to find out who was doing the strategy of special ops. That brought me to you. What are you guys working on? I went up and talked to him about it, global trend lines, food, water, energy, built environment, these things that we're trying to look at and influencing. He goes, okay, very interesting. And Wayne and I hit it off at that point, and just started this running conversation about strategy, what things should be. And one of those topics was grand strategy. Because one of the things we found out at Special Ops Command was that although we have a lot of strategies, we don't have a national strategy. We don't have a true trajectory directing this country. And we found out in trying to do a strategy for Special Ops, there was nothing to inform what we were going to do. So it wasn't a good enough excuse down there just to say, well, damn sure we don't have a grand strategy. We can't keep going. Well, so what we did, we made one up. We made up, if we could be the grand poobahs of the universe for a day, we would make up a grand strategy for the United States. This is what it would be, so we could get on with the business at hand of doing special ops strategy. And so that's what caught the attention of Admiral Mullen. That's what got me and Wayne together, and we continued to talk about it. Well, lo and behold, so this is October 2008 is when I heard from Wayne first. We had this continuing conversation until I get this breathless call in May of 2009 from Wayne, and he said, hey, can you come and help me with something? I was like, what? He goes, Admiral Mullen wants us to write a grand strategy for the nation. And I was like, sure. How long will that take? and he said, well, I don't know, maybe 2 months. I said, okay, well, let's make it 4 months just to be safe. So I get temporary orders up to the Pentagon. I've never been to the Pentagon before. It's a weird place. Anyway, so we went, never been to the Pentagon before. I got to tell the story, the design. I'm all about, my wife's an interior designer, so I kind of have this thing for design now, but design thinking, the Pentagon's a pretty masterful thing, Pentagon, 5 sides. You know why there's 5 sides? Anybody? It's perfect functional design because you have a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday side. So when you're sitting at your desk, you get a Monday piece of paper, you stick it out your door, it becomes somebody else's Tuesday paper. It goes all the way around the building. So when Monday I show up to work, I know exactly what I'm going to do. I got my Monday paper. This perfect design. So there you go. Taxpayers, thank you. It works really well. Absolutely great design. And by the way, if you go into emergency crisis mode, there's 5 levels too. So now you can put one paper down and put one paper up, and it's just really cool. So it works. It works. Working to this very day. So anyways, what was I talking about again? We're back. I ended up in the Pentagon. And we're supposed to do grand strategy. Well, that 4 months that I was supposed to be up there, and it turned into 2 years. All right? And it wasn't because it took a long time to do grand strategy. And this is something I would like to talk about seriously from the heart, is we have to be concerned about where ideas go and how ideas are articulated, and even if we're open to new ideas. Because when Wayne and I sat down, I'll just cut to the chase, we ended up writing this thing that I'll talk about in a second. It only took us a month. I got there in July of 2009. We wrote our baseline document by the 10th of August, 2009. It didn't get released to the public sphere until April of 2011. Almost a full 2 years just to get an idea thrown out there around grand strategy, because it was too, I guess, against the grain. That should scare you as citizens. It should scare you that the beauty of a democracy and a republic is that we should be living in an idiagora where ideas flow free. And I happen to subscribe to the Robert Pirsig notion that it's better for a society to kill an idea than an idea to kill a society than a society to kill an idea. That's what being a democracy is about. I think we have to take that to heart. Maybe not too much to heart. But that's what our republic's been framed out. That's what our Constitution holds so dear. And I think we need to act on it. And anyways, I had to give that little side note out because it bugs the hell out of me. It took 2 years to get an idea out the door. Anyways, back to the idea. So we're sitting there. I get to the Pentagon. Wayne and I, we go in this little cubby hole that we got. Actually, we had a window. That's a whole other story. But that was a major coup. Clearly, you don't understand the big deal about having a window in the Pentagon, particularly for a Marine colonel and a Navy captain, but it's a big deal. So afterwards, we can talk about that. So we sat down and we looked out that window and we said, okay, so we're supposed to write this grand strategy for Admiral Mullen. How do you do that? Well, the very first thing that we decided was we are not going to write a strategy. Not the way that strategies have always been done in D.C., the ends, ways, means paradigm, because we already have too many stinking strategies. We have so many strategies, we don't have a strategy. We have a national security strategy. We have a national defense strategy. We have a national military strategy. Do you know that we have a whole series of strategies around national bike safety? We have got strategies a go-go. We have so many strategies, we're like a box of marbles thrown on a linoleum floor. I mean, we're crazy. We're all over the place. But we don't have any coherent direction for this country. So Wayne and I said we are not going to be part of that, because what we thought that America needs is a stinking story. Not only it talks about where we currently are with a little bit of intellectual and emotional honesty, but where are we going to go? What is the cause of America? What is our direction? What is our purpose? What can we be? What should we be? And what is our obligation to become? And it wasn't lost on us, Thomas Paine's great words, the very first page of that little pamphlet called Common Sense in 1776, when he said the cause of America is in a great measure the cause of mankind. We took that to heart because we see right now in the place that we are in a global context, currently, the world needs an America to lead and lead towards a cause that's worthy of us as a nation and worthy of us as a people. And so when Wayne and I looked at that, we said we aren't going to just create another strategy, call it job done. What we said was we're going to write a story, and we ended up writing a thing called the National Strategic Narrative. It's only 12 pages long, but what we did is we looked at the world just through our eyes, our opinion only. It is only our opinion. But we looked at the world and we said, you know what? We are still trapped in the confines of containment. Now, and that's not to say that containment was wrong, or that the constructs of containment were wrong. They worked, but they don't work for us in the 21st century anymore. When George Kennan gacked out the long telegram in 1946 and he said, yeah, we got to contain the Soviets, absolutely the right thing to do. And when National Security Act in 1947 came out and birthed a construct to implement, well, that seemed to work. And it was good. Problem is, when the Soviet Union collapsed, guess what? We fell asleep at the switch and we've just been propagating the status quo. We've taken this approach, containment being a system, a closed system approach to strategy, where you can control things to a certain end, manipulate certain variables to a deterministic end. That worked in the Cold War because of the nature of information, the nature of the world, globalization, information age. Holy cow, it's different, and it doesn't work anymore. Because truly we are in an open system. And when you start talking about open systems, you can no longer talk about force and power and playing stratego in the world. You got to start talking about ecology, evolution, open systems dynamics, dynamic, complex, adaptive systems, and how are you going to be the best competitor in that system? And so for Wayne and I, when we looked at that, taking Darwinian theory, we said, holy cow, we probably better start talking about our own strength as an organism in this system so that we are the best competitor, and in the process of building our strength, we will have the most credibility and influence abroad. And around that idea around looking at it from an ecological perspective, in fact, we started calling it strategic ecology, we really had a little bit of insights, particularly about what would be that central idea going forward, what would be that grand strategic idea going forward into the 21st century to replace containment, that would inform the new structures that this country needs for the 21st century, that would allow us to fulfill not only our obligation to, but also the promise of that preamble of our Constitution. Well, I'm going to use a word, and I don't know, maybe I'll be safe using this word in this room. I live in South Carolina. It's not a safe word to use, but I've used it, and I've survived. But when we started looking at what would be that concept that could be a grand strategic framework, we used the word sustainability. All right? And I'm here to tell you as a Marine, I'm no tree hugger, but sustainability is not for tree huggers anymore. All right? It's math, it's science, it's freaking common sense. We live in a resource-constrained environment, and we also have to design ourselves anew so that we can thrive in an environment. That's what any healthy organism does. but we are on the path of a monoculture. Monocultures wither and die in any ecology. Monocultures are wedded to the status quo. Take a hard look at ourselves. What are we wedded to? The organisms, the organizations, everything that we've got going for us in America today is wedded to status quo. It's mostly wedded to a past view, a 20th century view of the world, not our 21st century future. Now, there are a lot of people, smart people, thinking about technologies and economies and things that we're going to have to do in the future. Great. If we don't have the institutional capacity and, most importantly, the social capacity to embrace the change that we have to take on going in the future, we're lost. This is grand strategy 101 stuff. It's got to get into our cultural fibers. So when we posited that sustainability should be our grand strategic imperative, yeah, it raised a few eyebrows. But let's peel that onion back just a quick minute. When we looked at sustainability, we just didn't take it from a green perspective. We took it truly from an ecological perspective. The ecological definition of sustainability is an organism's ability to remain diverse and productive over time. Now, if you consider, as we did, that our enduring national interests in America are prosperity and security, but we can only pursue that prosperity and security in a way that's commensurate with our values, and for us, we said our values as a nation are articulated in the preamble of that Constitution. Prosperity and security. How does that map to sustainability? Again, the definition. An organism's ability to remain diverse and productive over time. Diversity means depth, redundancy, resilience, security. That's what security in the 21st century is. It's not just Marines like me in funny tree suits running abroad and headbutting people. It's part of it. We got to do that kind of stuff. But we better start tending to our shop and thinking about security that it's just not from our shores going outwards anymore. That it's actually the integrated systems that make our society today. Food, water, energy, transportation, the built environment, education. We better start tending to our own home in such a capacity and start thinking about security in the home front, not just defense, Department of Homeland Security. I'm talking about how efficacious, how prosperous, how healthy are our systems. And I will tell you this much, it scares the shit out of me. Oops, I dropped it, didn't I? Don't tell my wife, she'll hate me. It scares me, being the Minnesota boy that used to work on our family farm, when I consider that 50% of Iowa's topsoil is gone. 50% of Iowa's topsoil is gone. In some swaths where we grow our food, up to 75%. I encourage you to read the Michigan State University study on our soils. Now, you being here on the East Coast and probably have an affinity and a kind of a deep affection for the cod industry, maybe we ought to start considering what Mother Nature does to man when we just start messing around too much with the stuff that she's given us. Because guess what? She's going to be just fine. Mother Earth's going to be fine because she's going to kick us to the curb pretty damn quick. And the world will get along just fine without us. So we better start thinking about that when you start considering the cod industry dropped to 1% before its pre-collapse levels, and it's only risen up to 30%. Talk about a painful gut punch, right? So that's what I'm talking about in terms of security. Security. But also that definition, organisms' ability to remain productive over time. That's what we're talking about growth. But again, back to the point. We live in a resource-constrained environment, right? It's math, it's science, it's common sense. We can no longer talk about growth in quantitative terms. We have to start talking about growth in qualitative terms. We are at that point. We are consuming as a human race 1.5 planets worth of resources. Holy cow, if the rest of the world consumed the way America does, we would need 4.5 planets worth of resources. That does not bode well for my 12-year-old son, and that pisses me off. Because we are doing it to our future generations. Is that little tiny line at the end of the preamble of the Constitution? To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity? What frickin' part of that did we forget? Meanwhile, we got 30% of our population is clinically obese? You gotta be kidding me. We need to push ourselves away from the table, not just in our eating habits, but in our consumption habits at a scale that human race has never seen before. Period. And America's got to lead that change. Organisms' ability to remain diverse and productive over time. Security. Prosperous. in a manner that's commensurate with our values as a nation as we defined it in the preamble of the Constitution. That's what informs us. That's what needs to inform a grand strategy. Sustainability seems to fit that mold of what we have to do as a nation. And, oh, by the way, just to get back to the realm of grand strategy, and it happens to match this concept of sustainability for our given context today, happens to match with a uniquely, quintessentially American way formula of doing grand strategy. Grand strategy American style is when we stand on our economy, stand on that foundation of a solid economy, and we align our governing institutions and our foreign policy to take on the global challenge of our age. Let me say that one more time. Stand on our economy, we align our governing institutions and our foreign policy to take on the global challenge of our age. And you say, surely that's not possible. Well, surely it is. In World War II, we were the arsenal of democracy. We armed and equipped our allies, fought a two-front war. We built up our army. What was the number, Patrick? Up to 16 million people? 16 million troops? And we won. The formula worked. And then, holy cow, we had to go into this little thing called the Cold War. The same thing. When Kennan gacked out the long telegram, he framed out an approach where we would outlast the Soviet Union, we would contain them and outlast them, and it would be a contest of economic and political wills. And it worked. We stood on our economy, we had a strong economy. We rebuilt Western Europe, and we rebuilt the Pacific around Japan, then later on into Korea. It worked. All right? Well, guess what? Today, what is, back to Thomas Paine, what is the cause of America? Well, the cause of America in our era is the latest global challenge. That global challenge is global unsustainability. I know that's not a word, but it captures the point. Who else is going to lead it? China's rising. We're going to tell them they can't? Good luck with that one. What about India? What about Brazil? We've got, everyone talks about the 9 billion people that are going to be coming into the world by the middle of the, we're going to have in the, as global population by the middle of the century. Well, that's not the stinking scary number. The scary number is that 3 billion people are going to be moving in the global middle class, and with their arrival comes a 300% increase in resource consumption. There's not enough stuff in the world to make that happen unless somebody steps up and becomes the leader and shows the way forward. That's what America's cause is. That's what we have to do. It's our burden. Suck it up. It's ours. Nobody else's. And oh, by the way, this isn't anything new. George Kennan came up with containment. Guess what? In 1954, he's already calling us out. There's a little known book called Realities of American Foreign Policy. It's about that thick. First 3 chapters are about, mostly focused on the Soviet Union. But the 4th chapter is really cool. 4th chapter, the title, love this title. It's called The Unifying Factor. I love that title. And it really captures what we have to become as a people and what we have to address as a people. Particularly on page 112 through 114. It's a really long paragraph, but he lays it out beautifully. He's talking about our internal development, how our internal development, who we are, and how we're developing as a people, how that relates to our foreign policy and our ability to be effective abroad. He goes so far as to say that nobody's going to accept leadership from somebody that's adrift in their internal development, particularly when they're drifting into bad and dangerous waters. This is 1954, and he's talking about the built environment. He's talking about our soils. He's talking about our areas of recreation and worship and education and what we're becoming as a people. And how much are we willing to pony up as a citizen? That's what sustainability is. It not only does it address our enduring national interests of prosperity and security, it maps to a quintessentially unique American framework for grand strategy, something we've done in the past. That's what Patrick and I are working on right now. And we've got a specific design, just so it's not just a big arm wave and fluff. We've got a specific design. It's a top-down, bottom-up push. We're probably going to focus more on the top-down policy piece. I'm going to turn it over to Patrick here to go through the actual guts of it because he actually knows what he's talking about. I'm just the eye candy, so. But we have historic forces at play right now that allow us to do this. It's just a matter of it's not belief. There's no elf on a moonbeam that's going to come down and make this happen. This is our burden. But we have the dynamics at play that make it real. Just like it was real for Roosevelt in World War II, just like it was real for Marshall in the Cold War. So I'm going to turn it over to Patrick to start laying out that framework. And then, I'm going to close it out with, I don't know, probably yell at you some more. Sorry. All right, Patrick.
Thank you, Puck. Thank you, Jim and Teresa and the Pell Center for having us here, and thank you all for coming out tonight to talk about this, what we think is a really critical topic in our nation's history, and it's in your being engaged tonight is what it's all about. So thank you for being out here. So if Puck is the jarhead, then I'm the pinhead, and that's how this relationship has been working. What we said was, hey, they did an incredible thing, sitting in the Pentagon calling for a national strategy of sustainability. For the folks who noticed, and folks in the New York Times noticed, but so did Tom Friedman and Brent Scowcroft and Anne-Marie Slaughter and a whole bunch of other, Jane Harmon at the Wilson Center noticed. It was a big, important call. We saw it was an important call, and what we said is, we'll take it the next step, pass the baton to us, and we'll take a stab at figuring out what a national strategy of sustainability really means. And so what we said we would do is do that deeper dig on some of the history of grand strategy, as Puck was just describing. Generate a simple template for what grand strategy could be for the United States in the 21st century. And then populate that generic template with our best guess as to what that strategy could be. And what we found out early in March, April of 2010 was that we were very much in alignment in terms of what we thought the challenge was and where we thought the solution set could be found. So what I want to do is tell you a little bit about that framework and then go into some of the details of how we're building out this strategy. And then Puck's going to close it out by talking about what we're doing with it. So remember, Puck defined grand strategy with a very specific language, right? He was saying, standing on your economy, we transform our governing institutions and our foreign policy to meet the great challenge of the era. Grand strategy for us is the correlation of the integration of your economic engine, your governing institutions, and your foreign policy to meet the great global challenge of the era. It's what we did in World War II, it's what we did in the Cold War. Two very different conflicts used the same strategic framework. We said that framework has worked for us before, let's look at that. The trick about grand strategy, if you want to do it, what we realize is that you have to not do what the Pentagon's doing in terms of planning right now, which is capabilities-based planning. What tools do we need? What you need to do is figure out what the challenge is out there, and then figure out your toolbox based on the challenge that you've got. So we focused on the challenge, and Puck covered a lot of it. And I'll just quickly go over the four big elements of the strategic environment we see out there as really defining the threats and the opportunities facing the United States in the coming decades. There's four: inclusion, depletion, contained depression, and a resilience deficit. Inclusion is bringing 3 billion people into the global middle class in 20 years, as Puck mentioned. We don't have enough planet to do it. And just to give you a sense of scale, when the average Chinese citizen comes into the formal sector of the global economy, their income goes up and their resource consumption goes up the same amount, 300%. Right? If the entire Chinese population had the same level of automobile penetration as the United States, they'd be consuming 118% of global oil supply. Right? That pace of economic inclusion is outpacing our ability to provide the resources and commodities necessary to meet that demand. And so we're living in a period of extraordinarily high commodity prices. That's going north very fast. And what we know is that when commodity prices for energy, water, food, strategic materials go far enough north, markets don't adapt so much as states intervene. And what we're seeing with the South China Sea, Persian Gulf, South and Central Asia, certain valleys in Africa, farmland in Brazil, we're seeing the competition over resources starting to determine strategic behavior of the great powers and the major economies. It's huge. It's a major driver of strategic threats and friction in the coming decades. The second challenge is what we call ecosystem depletion. It's climate change plus the destruction of natural capital and ecosystem services. We accept climate change. We also agree with Nick Stern that it's a lot worse than he reported a few years ago. And it's going to itself drive strategic threats and friction. It's already been disrupting our economic systems, whether that were the floods in Thailand, the floods in Pakistan, the droughts last year in our Midwest, but also in India, in China, and in Russia, Australia, this past winter, their summer. This is disrupting our food economy. We know what happens when food economies get disrupted, prices go up. And when prices go up in certain vulnerable communities, say like Egypt or Syria, stuff gets complex. Third challenge, what we're calling a contained depression. It's not our term, it's the Financial Times term. Right? Martin Wolf has been the great chronicler for the Financial Times of the contained depression that we're living through right now. This isn't a standard business cycle downturn that we're living through in the macroeconomic terms. This is a credit supercycle, as they say. We're in the midst of a deleveraging, right? When income is insufficient to match the debt servicing requirements on both corporate and household debt. Combined with the employment event of 2008, right? We've been sucked into a incredibly powerful austerity spiral, right? Where businesses have to shed labor to appear more profitable, reducing aggregate demand, reducing income, forcing businesses to shed labor to appear more profitable, and the cycle goes on and on. And we're still in that, and we're not even halfway through. Finally, what we call the resilience deficit. Our systems, our supply chains, our infrastructure is fragile. It's brittle. It's prone to shock, disruption, and capture. Whether it's the tsunami and earthquake in Japan, increasing American unemployment from 8.9 to 9.1%, our bridges collapsing in Minneapolis, or the president saying, triumphantly saying in the State of the Union this year that we're going to fund 70,000 bridges who need shoring up. That's a national shame. But the total bill for our infrastructure arrears in this country right now is $2.2 trillion. It's incredible. We've been systematically underinvesting in the infrastructure, and that just gets us so that the last economy is functioning properly. And when we looked at those four challenges, right, inclusion, depletion, contained depression, and the resilience deficit, what we recognized was you had the lion's share of the challenges coming at us. And really those four things kind of defined the major high mass, slow speed events that are driving a lot of threats and friction. Sure, there's things that are perennial social and cultural conflicts, Israel, Palestine, India, Pakistan, Taiwan, China. Those things are now increasingly being dragged into this new strategic dynamic. And so the inbox of the President of the United States, both on domestic and foreign policy, is getting filled up by the symptoms of these four dysfunctional problems. Big issue. We also recognize, however, that if you want to solve for any one of them now, it's incumbent upon you to solve for all of them. If you want to solve for climate change, you can't do that in a time of extraordinary wage and price competition globally. When you're living in the midst of a contained macroeconomic depression, and when all your infrastructure is pointing in the wrong direction. Start at any one of those points, you're in trouble. And so from a more, Puck gives the heartfelt, this is a historic moment. When we started looking at the analytics, we're saying there's no way. There's just no way. We cannot just try to go back to 2006 in our domestic economy. It's just not, we've got a $14 trillion economy. It needs to be a wind at our back, not a wind in our face. So when we started looking at grand strategy, we said, okay, that actually is how we're defining the challenge of unsustainability, that non-word that Puck mentioned. But how do you address it? Right? What's your entry point into that really messed up system? And because of this tradition of American grand strategy being based upon our economic engine doing the strategic heavy lifting, we were the arsenal of democracy in World War II. In the Cold War, we said we're going to defeat the Soviets by containing them abroad while outperforming and outlasting them in a contest of economic and political systems. Right? If that's the way that America did it before, let's see if we can start with our economic engine. So we looked there. We said, okay, well, where do we start in the economy? And we knew from our economic history that when you're facing a contained depression, when you're facing, not a contained depression, because we haven't been able to contain one up until this point. When you're facing a depression, when you're facing a deleveraging, the way that economies come out is ultimately that new large pools of demand, aggregate demand, are found or created, and the basic mechanics of wealth formation are reestablished. So we asked ourselves, where's the demand? Is there demand out there in the system somewhere? And what we came back with was a very happy answer. And so we started to say, all right, do we have the ability to start building out an economic engine? What I want to do is spend a little bit of time on that with you now, and then quickly talk about the foreign policy that seems to flow to close the gap between that economic engine and the threat environment. We okay for time?
Sure.
Great. So what we found when we started looking for demand was that there are three large piles of demand out there, which should give everybody a little bit of hope, especially after the depressing front end of this conversation that I've been having with you. Three big piles. Give you the labels and then I'll go into in depth. Housing, surprise, surprise. Resource productivity, and regenerative agriculture. Housing, agriculture, resource productivity. Housing is really fascinating. Housing, there's a demographic shift happening in the country, and I bet you've all been experiencing it. 56% of Americans now want something other than the suburban lifestyle of Ozzie and Harriet. Baby boomers and millennials are now entering the housing marketplace looking for a different product than classic drivable suburbia. What they want are walkable communities in service-rich, transit-oriented, opportunity-rich spaces. Boomers, I see a lot in the crowd, have just started hitting 65. And they don't want to go, well, one, they're going to have to work longer into what they thought was going to be their retirement, because savings hasn't been as good as they hoped. But two, they don't want to go to the old folks' home. They want to have the car keys taken from them from their suburban isolated home and get sent off to the factory. It's a real huge wave of demographics that is now in the process of downsizing and looking for that right-sized place, in a place where they can age gracefully into the golden years, which should be the golden years of their lives. Millennials, their kids, are just starting to do household formation, getting married, have kids, and they don't ever want to go back to the isolated suburbs of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. They just don't want to go back there. 77% don't want to go back. And so these two demographics, and my generation, the Gen X, is right in there with them. They're coming into the marketplace, and 56% of Americans want something else. Now, that's 56% of Americans. You say, well, 44% of Americans still want it. Well, they want what they've got. But to give you a sense of scale of this opportunity, it's 3 times the demand for housing after World War II. 3 times. And that's in proportional terms. In non-proportional terms, in total population size, it's 8 times the demand for housing after World War II. It is an incredible opportunity, and housing is the base of the consumer pyramid of the United States. Based on what house you buy, for the average American, that determines what car you buy, how much space you have to fill in that house, what consumer goods you buy, and then all your shopping behaviors, your consumption behaviors. from the ability to have to go to the Walmart or the ability to go to the farmer's market. So it's an incredibly powerful demographic trend that's happening that is just filled with economic opportunity for the United States. Good news. It also, and as you transition from from sprawl to walkable communities, you get an incredible 30% reduction in energy, water, solid waste. You start to address the strategic challenge facing America around sustainability. Incredible opportunity. Regenerative agriculture. Right now, the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and the Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome of the UN have had a joint report in July of last year saying that global food production has to go up 60% by 2050, and that 100% of that new food production has to be regenerative, meaning it fundamentally and simply rebuilds our soils and cleans up our waterways. Right now, the kind of agricultural production we're doing is doing the opposite. Our topsoil, as Puck was talking about, is leaving the farm and going into the Gulf of Mexico, right? And in the process, bringing all that nitrogen and killing our streams and waterways. That's not sustainable. To keep up with the 9 billion total population Puck was talking about, we're going to have to rebuild our soils while we're feeding that increasing population. But economically, for the American farmer, this is a great news story. They're already getting incredible high prices on global commodities markets for their products. But the great thing about regenerative agriculture is that it's lower input. You're not doing this big industrial high cost input farming that has been the norm over the since 1972, when Secretary of Agriculture Earl Butz declared that industrial agriculture was going to be the policy of the land. What this allows the farmer to do is get up to 300% the profit per acre out of their land, because the input costs go down so significantly. It's an incredible opportunity for rebuilding our heartland economies and our heartland communities. The third area of economic opportunity, of demand, is in resource productivity. What we're looking at is a requirement to meet the expectations of 3 billion people coming into the global middle class in 20 years. To give a sense of scale on that, over the last 20 years, we got to this level of commodity prices, only bringing in 1 billion people, right? We're about to triple that in the next 20 years when prices are already here, right? And as we said, markets don't adapt so much as states intervene when prices go too far north. So we have a strategic imperative to innovate on resource productivity. We need to deliver the attributes of a modern middle class global lifestyle at a much lower level of resource and energy intensity per unit of GDP. What that translates to is an incredible amount of basic science, R&D, engineering, advanced manufacturing. It's the high-wage, high-skilled jobs that our middle class needs to get back in the game. And so when we looked at this triad of demand, we saw incredible opportunity to put Americans back to work in housing, construction jobs. Incredible opportunity, and transportation, building out transportation jobs and then operating that transportation infrastructure. Incredible opportunities in agriculture, putting the heartland back to work, and incredible opportunities in manufacturing. As it turns out, those are the 4 top producing sectors in the country in terms of bang for the buck. For every dollar generated in the primary sector of manufacturing, agriculture, transportation, and construction. You get up to $1.35 in ancillary economic benefit from, for example, manufacturing. It's an incredible multiplier for your economy. Right now, our economy is limping by on service sector, which sucks dollars from the economy. It sucks growth out. We have the key to moving forward. And we have that key, we have that demand pool exactly at the time when there's a massive pool of capital sitting on the sidelines of Wall Street. As you may know from your stock portfolios, it's really hard to find good medium and long-term investments. Instead, there's up to $5 trillion in corporate cash sitting on the sidelines. There's incredible piles, trillions of dollars, also sitting in money market funds. Because there are no good long-term, medium and long-term investments to be found. That money is looking for manufacturing, construction, transportation, and agriculture. That's where that money, that's the productive economy. That's where those investments can really help America and provide a reasonable return to the investors. There's an incredible opportunity here. And that money doesn't have to flow through the Treasury, right? We can do that through bonds, through direct investments, through equity. We don't need the action of the government to spend on deficits and increase the size of government debt. It's an incredible moment that we have in front of us. And we said, look, between demand and capital, we got what we need for an economic engine. So we did some math, and we got $1.7 trillion of deficit reduction. We got unemployment down to 4.9%. We got some incredible indicators, as well as sequestering 100% of America's carbon output. We can meet our strategic requirements today by making this shift. But an economic engine does the heavy lifting. It doesn't do the whole piece of the job. What would we need in terms of a national security strategy to close the gap? The reality is America's economy is only about 20-25% of the global economy. We're 4% of the global population, right? We punch above our own weight, but we need the rest of the world to engage with us in partnership. But they're not going to engage with us until they recognize that we're serious, that we've got our own house in order. And so that economic engine is first and foremost in everyone's mind. But once we do get our own house in order, we change the logic of international relations right now. Whereas right now, say on climate change, we're asking the rest of the world to all hold hands and jump in together because of something called the tragedy of the commons logic, that it's not worth it for any one country to make the sacrifices required to fix climate change unless everybody else does it at the same time, and it's a level playing field. What having that economic engine does for us, it means it gives us what in business we call first mover advantage, early entrant advantage. The faster we move, the more gains we get. It changes the logic of global engagement for the United States. It's an incredible opportunity. But we have to work in two modes. One, in driving a new global partnership, and two, providing real assurances. And I want to talk to you about both of those really fast, and I'll turn it over to Puck. On partnership, what we need to do is start looking at three big areas where the global community, major economies at a minimum, need to start to collaborate more effectively. This isn't about ending war, but what it is about is fixing trade, fixing development strategies, and fixing, ensuring access and participation. Let me tell you about each of those. In terms of trade, what we set up with the GATT round, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and what turned into the WTO, the World Trade Organization, was an effort to go fast and furious towards global multilateral free trade. The reality of the system that we have today is that it's a two-tier system. There's major economies, and about 4 of them, the US, EU, maybe 5, Japan, China, India. And if you're not in one of those major economies, then you're in the tractor beam. You're in the second tier. You're in the tractor beam of one of those. And it's not a happy place. Everything's being drained from you: wealth, resources, and brains. And there's incredible imbalances among the first tier economies. That's the reality of the system that we've got today. Free trade is important, but we don't have a system of free trade right now. What we're looking at is a rebalancing around regional economies. This is where regions are going already, whether it's the EU, ASEAN, Latin America, even Africa is going in this direction, as a defensive mechanism, as a buffering mechanism, creating regional economic blocks. And in reality, the United States is a regional economic bloc. So is India. Together, we're stronger. Together, we have the scale. Together, we have the land resources. That's what's necessary for getting to sustainability. And each one of the natural kind of continental scale regions needs to start to get its own strategy for moving from where they are to someplace more sustainable. Because development is no longer, we're developed, you're developing, we're going to make you look like us, right? India's the last region that's still trying to build shopping malls, and they're starting to figure out that's not a good idea, right? That's not development anymore. Development is, we're unsustainable, you're unsustainable, you're unsustainable, you're unsustainable. We're all starting at a different place, but we're all moving to a similar level of resource and energy intensity per unit of GDP. It's going to look different because we're all from different cultures, we all have different preferences, we all have different geographic requirements, but fundamentally, we're moving towards something, and that new commonality, that new place of equivalence in terms of convergence around energy and resource intensity, I would argue lowers trading barriers, non-tariff trading barriers, greater than anything else. If the average Indian can afford the gas for an American vehicle, or has, hopefully it's going to be an electric vehicle, and they can afford our products, then we're going to be able to trade with them a lot better. That means embracing that income convergence, embracing that resource and energy intensity convergence. It also means getting a development strategy for regions that is not export-led growth and is not resource extraction. It's about, within each of those economic regions, real development. And it's a simple thing. When I was doing development overseas, I realized that what we call the American dream is shared by everybody. Everybody fundamentally wants to do better for themselves and for their families. And that, if you can tap into that, that's the major motivator of human behavior. And that's what you need to unleash in each of these regions. And the third thing, the problem is that there's 4 billion people around the world who do not have access to the tools of the formal sector of the economy. Right? They don't have an identity, a legal identity. They don't have a driver's license, they don't have a passport, they don't have any kind of papers. They don't have title to property. Right? So they can't prove that where they live or that they own that shop. So they can't collateralize it. They can't take a risk on themselves. They don't have access to finance, to credit, to banking, to insurance, to judges, to justice. Right? 4 billion people, the majority of the world's population, do not have access to that. There's no way they can even try capitalism. Right? They're all living in the black market or the gray sector. They can't do it. So those are 3 things that we can all work on together as the global community of nations: trade, development, access and participation. But America also has to provide assurance. Now, part of that is traditional security assurance, that in this incredible transitional period, that borders are not going to be changed without due process of law and self-determination, or else we're going to send Puck's friends out to get them. But there's another level of assurance, and this is where I'm going to close. There's an assurance that America is going to stay the course. And let me just finish on a story. When I was briefing this to a former minister of commerce from Saudi Arabia, he said, one of the reasons why this is so attractive to us, what this story you're telling us, is because we have 3 large strategic challenges facing the kingdom. Number one is American unpredictability. Number two is domestic unrest, and number three is a rough neighborhood. But they're all driven in large part by number one. America is unpredictable. The rest of the world doesn't know what this administration, this country is doing today, and we don't know that they're going to continue doing that in 4 years. That's not what America's about. That's not why we won World War II or we won the Cold War. We were able to play a long game. We are not able to play a long game. We're not even playing a game right now. We have the ability to do great things, to lead the world. But we can't just say we're number one to lead the world. We have to solve the great challenges facing the rest of the world and earn that leadership role. We have the ability to become prosperous, secure, and sustainable. And we think it's time. Thank you for your attention.
So now you know why I hang out with him, because he's so stinking smart, you know. I mean, it's in that framework, Patrick thought this thing through. I mean, so it's not a fluff idea. It actually matriculates into very real things that this nation can do. And I wanted to just hone in on a word that Patrick kept using, the word opportunity. Remember I talked about all the strategies that we have? Well, every strategy that we have is focused on threat and risk. Right? The last time I checked, we're not the land of threat and risk. We're supposed to be the land of opportunity. And oh, by the way, we're supposed to be engaging our citizens with a story of opportunity. But yet we engage them with a story of threat and risk. Unbelievable. I mean, I don't know if anybody knows it, but you got a 1 in 20 million chance of getting popped off by some terrorist event. You know? I mean, hell, you got better odds than, winning the lottery. All right? 1 in 20 million. The average American has a 1 in 2,700 chance of dying from an obesity-related cause. Yet where are we putting our money? Where are we putting our focus? Where is the challenge to Americans? American citizens. This challenge of opportunity, to pursue opportunity. Because that's where the meat meets the metal, is with our citizenry. That's our message. So yeah, there's a bunch of stuff for Washington, D.C., but holy cow, those big bins of demand, they can manifest themselves. The big bins of demand that we'll talk about up in Wall Street and we'll talk about on Capitol Hill, they'll matriculate right down into Main Street, into those 4 big bins of opportunity for Americans, for real jobs. If only we got the guts to go out and do it. And I want to, this thing about the preamble of the Constitution, damn it, I'm going to talk about it one last time. Being from Minnesota, everybody loves Hubert Humphrey up in Minnesota. And I guess I'm apolitical, but come on. He's from Minnesota, so you got to love him. Plus, we got a stadium named after him, And, but he has this great, if you've ever read any of his stuff, his discussion about the preamble. That's just not a thing that they tacked on the front of a great document. But those are actually action words in that preamble. That they call for an obligated, purposeful participation of our citizenry to enact those words. That we the people, first of all, the first three words, we the people. Yeah, I had to do my Marine count. We the people, right? It doesn't say waiting on Washington in order to. It says we the people in order to form a more perfect union, to establish justice, to ensure domestic tranquility, to provide for the common defense, to promote the general welfare, and to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Those aren't just, hey, I hope somebody else gets that job done. This is de Tocqueville in practice. This is our time. We have a framework that makes it not just a big arm wave, but it makes it real if we have the guts, the initiative, the will to do it and take on this global challenge of our age. And if you think it's utopian, and by the way, I was called utopian quite a bit in the Pentagon. And I spent 28 years in uniform. I got to do my, shooting and scooting and doing all that fun stuff. So I challenge anybody to question whether I'm utopian. Well, maybe I am. Because quite frankly, my answer to whether I'm utopian or not is a damn straight I am. Because it's not lost on me do an etymological drill on the word utopia. And Patrick's sick of hearing me to say this, but I love saying it, so I'm going to say it because it makes me feel good. There's different ways, you know, for the Greek, you break it down in Greek. There's different ways to spell utopia, topos, place, right? You can have an OU topos, or you can have an EU topos. Well, OU topos is no place. EU topos is good place. Which one do you want? Which one are you going to strive for? Which one are you going to look at your kids and say, hey, you're going to tell your kids, quit dreaming? God damn it, we're working for no place now. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. Right? And then we'd be well advised to take the advice of our Navajo friends and say that you can't get to a good place in a bad way. We just got to fix our way. It's that simple. That's what this grand strategy is about. It's not just fluff anymore. It's not something for history books. It's our present challenge as a people, as a nation. And it's worthy of us as a people and a nation. That's our shtick. Thank you.
So we've got some time for Q&A here tonight. You can see sort of why we were almost late. We were talking a little bit over dinner. But I've got tons of questions I can throw in, but something from the audience. Something, sir. Wait, you know what? I'm going to bring this right over to you and hopefully not blow the sound out.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was really thought-provoking. What level are you seeing, or what level has your grand strategy been vetted at the national command structure? And are you seeing any buy-in at the executive level or from this administration?
Well, I guess without, you know, I mean, yeah, it's been, you know, how far up, it's hard to say where does it stop, but we've got interest from the executive level, but also, interestingly, from large-scale private sector, but also all the way down to Main Street. I mean, that's why we didn't get into the excruciating details of the framework, but there's a top-down, bottom-up design. And so, and it's purposeful by nature. You know, I mean, first of all, you can't do anything without Washington. You can't do anything without large corporate America, and you can't do anything without the actual engagement of our citizenry. So that's why we made a top-down, bottom-up design. It's a big, massive headache, you know, to try to pull this off, but it is getting traction. And I don't know how much detail we want to get into. He is actually in D.C. I live in Beaufort, South Carolina, where the Dolphins roam free, because I ran out of. But so I'll let him talk about the D.C. part of it. But I will tell you this much: maybe later on, I can talk about what's going on Main Street across various pockets around the country that we got going.
Yeah, the brave Marine leading from behind.
That's right.
Without breaking confidences, I can tell you who I briefed. So I briefed within the Executive Office of the President, the National Security Council staff, the Domestic Policy Council staff, National Economic Council staff. I've been briefing the National Intelligence Council, which is the top of our national intelligence community, the Office of Secretary of Defense for Strategy, Plans, and Forces, USAID, EPA, Department of Energy, USDA. We've been getting an audience, so that tells you something. I think it is fair to say that in the wake of last year's drought, in the wake of Hurricane Sandy, facing a fiscal cliff, and now living in the midst of that mess, there's been a call for big ideas, and we're right in there. Yep.
Thank you, sir. Question over here.
I think you guys are great players, and I'll use a sports analogy since I'm a former quarterback. I think at both the private and the public level, we have very poor coaching and corrupt and poor officiating. And it predominates the whole system. And how do you uproot that? How do you change this coaching staff at the political level? How do you change these referees that aren't refereeing in the private sector? How do we get these corporations who have poor coaches at the top of their corporations who would eat their young? You know, that's what's happening here. We're eating up everything in the world. India's middle class is going to exceed the population of the United States in 10 years or 15 years or so. It's an enormous problem.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of great players out there, but how do we displace What's up against us here?
Well, I mean, I'll give you a simple Simon answer. Stoics' philosophy is control what you can control, because if you try to control the uncontrollable, you'll be a miserable son of a bitch. I'm paraphrasing, but if Epictetus was sitting here, that's what he would say. And to answer your question is, I don't know, but you got to dive in and figure it out. It's a very complex system. I will tell you where my heart of hearts is, particularly how do you get around those, or how do you transform those institutions or make them work better. I don't have the formula for that, but I do believe that when we talk about the market forces that Patrick laid out, and you talk about them in opportunity space, and then you manifest them at the most local of levels. This is my opinion, the last real political institutions that are working are mayors at that level, because they actually have to deliver the goods. And that's why part of the thing that we're talking about, we are doing, is leveraging basically the economic theories of Michael Porter, but a few others around regional clusters, and to take these opportunities and put them on Main Street. And the idea is changing the political calculus through the market forces that people desire. When you start showing this, what we're calling the concept of full spectrum sustainability as the economic logic around things, that's how you're going to change political calculus. That the ideologies that are pinning us to the mat are killing us. And oh, by the way, when we start doing that kind of, I hate to use the word smart growth because those are kind of stinky words now, I guess, but so anytime I say a word that you don't like because you got something, just replace it with the word kumquat. Nobody gets pissed off about the word kumquat. I mean, it's kind of a cute word. So if you don't like smart growth, kumquat. But smart growth can be our basic framework for smart power abroad, because these are these global channels. So I can't do anything about India, but what I can do is say, I can no longer, from a United States perspective, be 4% of the population consuming 25% of the resource and say, whoa, India, slow down. I can't do that. What I can do is start demonstrating a different way forward, and I believe that way forward, and again, I take a page from de Tocqueville, what he marveled about America when he wrote Democracy in America, is that nobody's waiting around for anybody to tell them what to do. We organize at the most local of level. That's what he saw the most powerful element of democracy. That's where I pin my hopes. So I hope that was very satisfying for me to say. I hope it was very satisfying for you to hear, but I doubt it. But that's where I think we have to actually physically do it. That's where it's got to be done.
We're going to come over here just 1 second. But let me. Do you want
quick two-finger?
Sure.
Yeah. Just two things. One on the metaphor. I think that the trick about self-governance is that it's not a rooting for your team sport. So the metaphor, I would just urge you to reconsider, because, well, I was captain of my team in high school. I get it. Turns out self-governance and democracy is not a team sport. And I think the two parties have been working really, really hard to make people root for either team or not root for any team and opt out. And the thing about self-governance is that we all have to participate. We all have to engage. And so break that metaphor wherever possible. Please do it. Engaging in these kind of conversations, but actually then going out and doing something. And that's what we found out as recognizing that we had to stop, playing our role as Marine and Wong and start getting a lot more actively involved in the process. It has been a realization and learning for us. So I would encourage you to work on that, to look at that metaphor critically. And then second, I think our theory of change is where, underlying your question is a real good one. And that theory of change is I just want to underscore what Puck said. There is, and it came out in my remarks, there is both threat and opportunity in the challenges that we face in the coming decades in the 21st century. That threat will throw off risks, but they're really going to be shocks and crises. We have to be ready to take advantage of them. We got opening because of Hurricane Sandy, and we're trying to take advantage of that right now. The system that dysfunction is throwing off threat and risk in the form of shocks, and we have to be ready with some good ideas. And then, but the flip side is that I don't think there's going to be a Pearl Harbor associated with this set of challenges until it's way too late. And so what we're going to have to do is utilize that opportunity and have the attractiveness of this alternative outperform, what one party is selling as austerity and the other party is selling as austerity plus manufacturing, right? There's got to be a better way. And so a combination of taking advantage of crises and also having a more attractive product while getting more people participating, that's where we're going. But I appreciate your underlying question. I just want to kind of flag the metaphor because I think self-governance is not a team sport.
We're going to go over here, then we'll come back here.
Well, you presented a very compelling idea. Thanks for that. I teach strategy and policy at the Naval War College, so whenever I hear a convincing and compelling idea, I'm always curious to know if there's any specific historical antecedents that you've drawn from. You mentioned containment. You've both quoted extensively from some very diverse and interesting sources, but when you're giving these presentations to whoever it might be, do you draw from anything like Thucydides or any other examples from history, from any time period, to try and illustrate the situation that we face? Or is it so new that it's simply something that you're...
No, to that point, first of all, Thucydides, being a product of the command and staff and war colleges, I mean, I know never, ever go to Sicily. So I read about this. Meanwhile, nobody reads...
Sicily's not part of the strategy.
That's not part of it. But, I mean, I just
That's okay.
pointed out, but Sicily's a lovely place. But to a point, I mean, the overused analogy, obviously, we referenced the American context. I would also say that the power of grand strategic ideas flow back. I mean, Lincoln, obviously classic, particularly, everyone looks at the Gettysburg Address. I mean, it was only 10 sentences, a little over 2 minutes long, but it fundamentally started a grand strategic trajectory when he articulated that the government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from this earth. I mean, he laid down a red line about what this republic will be. And set a trajectory of events. There were subordinate events, anywhere from Emancipation Proclamation to Reconstruction, all the way through, that led up to the Civil Rights Movement, to where we are right now. That is grand strategic. That's a grand strategic logic that cascades through administrations through time. But the overused one is obviously Rome. And I use this, but I use Lewis Mumford's treatment in The Condition of Man, when he writes about about Rome, because it's a great. I mean, first of all, he really calls out citizenry, because one of the great lines it's around page 80-something or other. He says that everyone sought security, but no one accepted responsibility. And talking about, when we talk about prosperity and security, we look at those as an integrated system. You can't have one without the other. Yet today, we're currently expending our prosperity in pursuit of this illusory condition of security that's defined in a 20th century context. Bad guys, our shores outward. It's exactly what Rome did. They pushed the legions out. Rome continued to rot from within. And so my analogy is, where they chucked the loaves of bread up into the Colosseum to placate the mob, we're chucking things like cash for clunkers and $2.50 gallon, promises of $2.50 for a gallon of gas. It's nothing more than placating the mob. It's on both sides of on the aisle. And I will say this, that the Romans had a little quip that they would say. It'd say, Hannibal antiportus. Hannibal's at the door. Because thank God, Cyprico Africanus, he went over kicked Hannibal and his elephants right where it counts and stopped it from happening. Well, guess what? Hannibal did come. Came in 415 AD, except his name wasn't Hannibal. His name was Alaric. And he brought all his Visigoth pals with him, and they sacked Rome, and Rome fell and crumbled because they didn't tend to their house. That is the best analogy. It's a negative analogy of what happens when you don't tend to this integrated system, when you forget that your domestic condition defines your ability to engage, and that anything else, if you're not tending to your domestic strength, your national strength, not only from a physical standpoint, but also from a values-based standpoint, you will crumble. You don't have the capacity to continue ad infinitum. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I mean, there's plenty of historical references. They're just all too overused because we're talking about something unique to our condition, and that's the challenge of our day.
Let me just pick up on that real fast and put it into the U.S. strategic context. I think up to World War II, we really were enjoying the secure fastness of our two oceans as buffers. And so you had a whole era kind of that came to an end with Alfred Thayer Mahan that was really focused on this, how do we utilize that strategic space and depth that has been given to us by our geography and relationship to the other major economies. I think World War II and the effect of industrialized war started to change that. Those oceans were not so protective anymore, and now they're virtually meaningless because, as you heard me describe, the challenges that we're actually facing are not ones in which we're worried about planes and submarines coming across our oceans. It's about the economics and geopolitics, and we're fundamentally intertwined. And so we're back into a position where those longer durée historical analogies come back into place, where you're living side by side with other competitive nations. I think that's really important. But what I would end on, though, on this note is that grand strategy, in my opinion, was built into a lot of Jefferson's thinking, because the precedent to the FDR administration restructuring our economy, our governing institutions, and our foreign policy to meet a great global challenge was really built into the Constitution, in which we have certain principles that are hardwired and unchangeable built into the Constitution, right? But the institutional parameters, the institutional structures that we create, that can be created and should be created by every generation. And in fact, one of the 4 tablets in the Jefferson Memorial are about this. And I can never remember the quote, but essentially it's that note that it would make as much sense for a young man to wear the clothes of his grandfather as to force the current generation to live under the institutions of their predecessors. Those institutions were designed for a very specific set of challenges and a very specific state of knowledge. And our economy was designed around the same thing. And in fact, we explicitly designed our economy around where the demand was right after World War II, right? Housing, reconstruction materials, and consumer goods. It doesn't make sense anymore. And so what I believe the framers did was say, look, okay, we figured out, we got rid of the tyranny coming from King George. We bound a potential tyrant in the presidency. What's the next potential tyrant that we should be focused on? And it's institutions. It's this bureaucracy. We need to provide the people of the United States the ability to innovate their institutions as challenges and knowledge advance. And so the way I look at it is grand strategy is the responsibility in generational terms to continually assess the environment and say, is that strategy, those institutions that embody that strategy, really meeting the challenges and incorporating the knowledge of today? And I think by any measure you could say today we're failing on that. And it's time for a change. And so what's the strategy to get there?
Yep. I'm sorry, I just got to pile on that one more time, and particularly for where you're coming from, sir, is that it's very interesting to me, just to what Patrick's point is, we never really talk enough about U.S. code other than what does it give us right now, particularly Title 10 for the military, but Title 22 in diplomacy, Title 50 in intelligence, also things like Title 31 for finance and things like that. As a Marine, a retired Marine, it wasn't lost on me that our institution, I mean, U.S. code is, in my opinion, is nothing more than our interpretation of the Constitution on how it should be implemented in our current context. And yet we fundamentally are scared to actually go in there and fundamentally rework the authority structures of how our government works to match that context. We keep tacking crap onto it just to make it more cumbersome, but it makes it less coherent. And to the point, from the Marine Corps, the basic mission statement, Title 10 mission statement for the Marine Corps, and I'm diming up the Marine Corps. Is there any Marines in here? So don't shoot me. But the minute we got to look ourselves in the mirror, got to be honest about it. Is the basic fundamental language for the Title 10 mission statement of the Marine Corps was crafted in 1927 at the Army Navy Board in 1927. It fundamentally hasn't changed. That we're basically come from the sea, secure overseas basing in pursuit of a naval campaign. And we reference that in the Marine Corps for everything that we buy in the Marine Corps right now to fulfill that mission. That mission's 86 years old. Are you shitting me? You telling me that the world hasn't changed a little bit, that maybe we ought to refine that a bit? But we haven't. And we will call it out. God bless him. I know the Commandant personally, who used to be my squadron commander, but we will always call out to Congress, say, hey, by Title 10, by law, we're supposed to provide 2 divisions, 2 air wings, across the board. Well, 3 really, but we're calling them reserves back then when Vandergrift was about. But come on. We got to be smarter with our resources. So sorry, I just wanted to throw that on there about U.S. code as well.
I know we've got at least one more question here, but I've got to sort of follow up on this just a little bit. So there's a lot of unpacking of U.S. code that can be done, but there's also some. I'll cut right to the chase. Is it time for a second constitutional convention?
Constitution, no. Grand strategy, yes. I think getting back into history mode, the correlation of our economic engine and our governing institutions and our foreign policy happened with a lot of luck, a little bit of foresight, and some good planning, especially around the national security side of it. But you fundamentally had the economic engine being driven not, in 1944 with the GI Bill, which was the big anchor of that push to suburbia, trying to make sure that we prevented another bonus army march. Everybody know what the bonus army march was? Right? 1932, 1933, World War I vets march on Washington. And who was involved in suppressing that rebellion and burning down part of Washington, D.C.? Marshall, Eisenhower, Patton, and MacArthur. Right? They knew, and FDR, right? They knew that when you had 1 million returning vets who were unemployed, you had an insurrection on your hands. You had 15 million returning vets, you had a real problem. And so they made sure that they didn't have that again. And you had it was no coincidence that the head of the VFW was the drafter of the legislation. So, but 1949, Truman sees, uh-oh, they got the bomb, we got to disperse the population. And so he puts out a executive order, it really was a memo to all the agencies and departments to disperse the population and to disperse industry. And so that GI Bill got first catalyzed by the Truman memo, and then Eisenhower picked up with it in the 1956 Interstate Highway and Defense Act. And so the economic engine, and then we also knew we had to do the Marshall Plan, and that was good for business, right? We knew that there was incredible pent-up demand for consumer goods in the United States after 16 years of either depression or war. And so we tapped into that, and we knew this time we have to do an incredible amount of strategic planning at once. We have to do it in a short time frame, but that is not constitutional work. It's not constitutional work. We've got a great constitution. It has the frameworks. It has the purpose statement. What we need to do is recognize that the institutions that we have today, EPA, HUD, may go away, and probably should. And that the relationship between DOD, State Department, USAID, some of those, are going to flow.
And the private sector and the civil sector. These are all national resources that we haven't addressed in any purposeful way around any type of authority structure.
Right. And just to that point, on the final historical vignette I'll drop on this. It's December 1952, and General Marshall visits President-elect Eisenhower. And he says, Ike, we did a lot of great things in this last administration, but we didn't tie up a grand strategy. It's up to you to put the full resources of the nation behind a grand strategy and stop this self-defeating bickering across the country. That's your job. That did not involve the Constitution. Fundamentally, we can do this. It is through big statutory changes, which are heavy lifts from where you used to work. But it is not the Constitution. The Constitution's good. what we need to do is look at those institutions and leverage. To do that, you're going to have extraordinary external leverage from outside of Washington to make those changes. And so as long as those incentive structures outside Washington are aligned, then the bureaucrats inside are going to have a lot more incentive to make some changes.
Let's get one more question here.
How much time do you think we have? And the reason I ask is because you're asking us to make a lot of fundamental changes that, you know, might kind of run against the grain of a lot of people in the world. You know, for example, a lot of the personal responsibility that you tout as being really important sort of leads us to run off in a direction and we don't necessarily play well with others, right? So how much time do you think we have to make these kinds of changes?
Well, I'll give you a smart aleck comment, and then I'll give you, I guess, a best guess. I mean, I get this question a lot, and so I always my analogy is when I was a young pup going to airborne school down at Fort Benning, you know, learning how to, just turned 18 years old, learning how to jump out of airplanes, and I guess I looked kind of, you know, Minnesota bumpkin. I think I only had like 2 airplane rides in my life up into that point, getting about ready to climb on the airplane, and the sergeant airborne was standing there and looked at me, and he said, "Hey, don't worry about it. If you jump out of the plane, you don't see a big chute above your head, you got the rest of your life to figure it out." You know? So I mean, that's why I'm looking at this. We got the rest of our lives to figure out. I don't know how much time, but if I had to make a guess, just given all the trend line converging and just things, Mother Nature's on her own timeline. So this is just about just the trend lines that we've been talking about. 2050 sounds like a fair spot, but that means that's when the systems had better be kicked in, which means you better back that up about 30 years, particularly when you start talking about agriculture and stuff. We're talking 2020. We better have at least a very good serious start on this, that it's accepted and something's happening. Yeah. So, you know, put your finger up in the wind and let me know. But that's my guess.
Yeah.
One more. One more.
Real quick,
Yeah.
are we preparing our students for these sorts of jobs?
Well,
New agriculture, new manufacturing?
that's. Yeah, I'll turn it over to Pat to close it out. But when Wayne and I wrote this national strategic narrative, we had 3 strategic priorities we had to focus on. The first one was education, because you're absolutely right. We are not educating our kids. For the demographics of farming, by the way, I mean, our aging population of our farmers, we got to bring kids back. So, because this is high tech, high profit. I mean, this isn't just the way I used to have to go clean out the chicken coop in Minnesota kind of farming. I mean, this is high-tech stuff, high science, and we have to educate to that end in full systems approach. Advanced manufacturing. Get off of the paradigm that we're currently on. I think it would really do well to look at some of the models that not only Germany has, but or some of our classic organizations like General Motors Institute of nurturing somebody up in an industry and having to go from shop floor up to head shed and figure all that out so they have a full systems appraisal. Now, you don't want to have that old industrial framework because I don't think it would work, but you get the idea. So you're absolutely right. To me, that's if I'm any passionate about anything, is we really got to start focusing on the grayware of our kids. It's not going to be hardware. It's not going to be software. It's got to be the grayware that we're going to cultivate in our kids to take on, make them the most competitive, entrepreneurial, innovative young citizens because we've really screwed it up. So it's going to be in their hands. So that's an emotional answer to it, but so yeah, got any great ideas on how to do that? I'm in. All right.
So to close out on that, I think to quote a former Secretary of Defense, you go to war with the army you have, right? What we're going to have to figure out this grand strategy today, tomorrow, next year, next couple of years. And so in terms of we don't have time for education to kick in to support the development of grand strategy. We have to make a national commitment to this in the coming years. However, education is squarely within the grand strategy. It's just the way we look at it education is something that is paid for either by private wealth or by public revenues. And to generate those and to create the conditions in which you have enough to spend on the amount of education that we need, you need to get that economic engine back in shape. So focus on that. Don't focus on the precondition, for, having, we've got a certain amount of education, work with that, just accept it, get that economic engine going. It's going to put people back to work, and Americans are extraordinarily intuitive, inventive, innovative people. We'll figure it out. We'll get that education real fast. We've got an incredible educational establishment, and the Pell Center and Salve Regina are part of that great tradition. We will educate, but let's get that purpose, get the nation aligned to that purpose. That's the priority today, and then education can track with where those opportunities are. And there's incredible economic opportunities out there that's going to require whole new educational programs and systems. We're going to be doing that. It's a great opportunity for educators. I think if you're the President of the United States and you're putting the grand strategy on one page, the sequence of this map is economic engine generates the revenues, both public and private, that can then be spent in the educational sector.
Patrick Doherty, Puck Mickleby, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen,
Thank you.
please.